He divorced me after 28 years and married his young secretary the very same month. He told me I'd let myself go, that I was too focused on our grandchildren, that he needed someone who made him feel alive again. Then he moved her into the house my grandmother left me, the home where I'd raised our 3 children and hosted 35 years of Sunday dinners. They thought I'd just fade away like a good little ex-wife, collecting my Social Security and knitting in some tiny apartment. She redecorated my kitchen and threw out my grandmother's china. But what they didn't know was that this grandmother had one more lesson to teach. By the time I was finished, they were begging for the mercy I'd run fresh out of. The morning Robert served me those papers, I was making his favorite blueberry pancakes. Funny how life works. There I was, still caring for a man who'd already picked out wedding bands with another woman. He sat across from me at our breakfast table, the one we'd bought at an estate sale when we were newlyweds, and slid that manila envelope toward me like he was passing the salt. "Margaret," he said, not even meeting my eyes, "we need to talk about our future." Our future? There was no "our" anymore. He'd already decided that part when he started taking those long business trips that, as I later learned, were actually romantic getaways to Miami Beach. She was 32, just a few years older than our youngest daughter, Sarah. Her name was Crystal, of course it was, and she worked at his accounting firm. Started as an intern, he told me later, like that somehow made it better. Like I was supposed to understand that these things just happen when you work late hours during tax season. What hurt most wasn't the affair. It was the premeditation. He'd been planning this grand exit for 2 years, moving money, hiding assets, consulting lawyers behind my back while I was planning our anniversary party. While I was picking out invitations that said, "Still going strong," he was picking out condos with her. But Robert forgot something important about me. Before I became a grandmother who baked cookies and knitted scarves, before I became the woman who waited dinner for him every night, I was Margaret Chen, the woman who put herself through accounting school while raising 3 kids. And this grandmother was about to balance one final ledger. Before I continue with what happened next, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being here with me today. If you're comfortable sharing, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you how this grandmother turned the tables on the man who thought I'd just disappear. Let me paint you a picture of what our life looked like before everything crumbled. Robert and I met at a church potluck in 1995. I was a single mother with a 4-year-old daughter from a previous relationship, working 2 jobs and going to night school. He was the charming accountant who offered to fix my car when it broke down in the church parking lot. He didn't judge me for being a single mother. Instead, he brought toys for little Anna and helped me study for my CPA exam. We married 2 years later in 1997 in my grandmother's backyard. Nothing fancy, just family, homemade food, and promises we meant at the time. My grandmother pulled me aside that day and handed me an envelope. Inside was the deed to her house. "This is yours, Margaret," she said. "Keep it in your name only. A woman needs something that's just hers." I thought she was being old-fashioned, but I honored her wishes. Robert adopted Anna officially when she turned 7, and we had 2 more children together, Michael in 1999 and Sarah in 2001. I built my life around that family like a fortress, brick by careful brick. We moved into my grandmother's house after she passed in 1998. Robert agreed it made financial sense. No mortgage meant we could save for the children's education. He never pushed to have his name added to the deed. "It's your family home," he'd say. "That's sacred." When my mother was diagnosed with dementia in 2015, I reduced my hours at the accounting firm to care for her. decision, said family came first. He was making good money as a senior partner by then. I spent 2 years driving her to appointments, managing her medications, holding her hand through the confusion. When she passed in 2017, she left me her savings and her china, the same china Crystal would later throw in the garbage. That house became our family sanctuary. Every Christmas morning happened in that living room. Every birthday cake was baked in that kitchen. Anna's wedding reception spilled out into that backyard. Michael announced his engagement on that front porch. Sarah learned to drive in that driveway. Nearly 3 decades of memories soaked into those walls. I managed our household finances, raised our children, hosted his company parties, and smiled through endless client dinners. I was the woman behind the successful man, and I was content with that role. I thought we were building something together. I never imagined I'd be planning my revenge from that same kitchen table. The truth about Robert's affair didn't come out dramatically. There was no lipstick on his collar or perfume on his jacket. Instead, it was a credit card statement that arrived on a Saturday morning. A charge for a jewelry store, $3,000 for a diamond tennis bracelet. My birthday had passed 2 months earlier with only a card and dinner at Olive Garden. Our anniversary. He'd forgotten it entirely. When I asked him about it, he said it was a gift for Crystal, his secretary, for her 5-year work anniversary. She's been invaluable to the firm, he said, not even blinking. It's a business expense. I might have believed him if I hadn't seen the way she looked at him during the company Christmas party, the way her hand lingered on his arm, the way he laughed just a little too loud at her jokes. I started paying attention after that. The gym membership he suddenly needed at 56, the weekend conferences that never seemed to have websites or registration confirmations, the new passwords on his phone and laptop, the way he'd shower immediately when he came home, like he was washing away evidence. The confirmation came from the most unlikely source, my hairdresser, Linda. She pulled me aside after my appointment and said, "Margaret, honey, I don't know how to tell you this, but I saw Robert at the Marriott downtown last week. He was with that young girl from his office. They weren't discussing tax returns." That night, I didn't confront him. I made his favorite dinner, pot roast with all the fixings, and listened to him lie about his day. He talked about client meetings that I knew never happened, about lunch with his brother, who I later learned was out of town. Each lie was smooth, practiced, delivered between bites of the food I'd spent hours preparing. The worst part was discovering how long it had been going on. 2 years. 2 years of lies. 2 years of me taking care of his mother when she had her hip replacement while he was taking Crystal to wine tastings. 2 years of me babysitting our grandchildren while he played young again with a woman who probably didn't even know what a rotary phone was. But the deepest cut came when I found their text messages on our shared iPad. He'd forgotten to log out. There it was, their whole sordid story, including one message that stopped my heart. "Once the divorce is final, we can redecorate that awful house. Starting with that ancient kitchen, my grandmother's kitchen, in my grandmother's house." The straw that broke this grandmother's back came in the form of a moving truck. I'd been at my daughter Anna's house, helping with the new baby, when my neighbor Patricia called. "Margaret," she said, her voice shaking, "there's a U-Haul in your driveway. That young woman from Robert's office is directing movers. They're taking boxes inside." I drove home in a controlled fury, the kind that comes when shock overrides rage. Sure enough, there was Crystal, all 5'2" of her, wearing designer jeans and pointing movers toward my front door. My front door. She was holding a clipboard like some tiny general conducting an invasion.
"Excuse me," I said, stepping out of my car. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" She turned to me with a smile that could only belong to someone who'd never faced real hardship. "Oh, Margaret," Robert said, "you'd be at Anna's all day. We're just moving some of my things into the spare room. Don't worry, we're being careful with your stuff. My stuff, in my house, that my grandmother left me." "I don't recall giving anyone permission to move into my home," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake in my chest. She actually laughed, a tinkling, practiced sound. "Robert said you might be difficult about the transition. Look, I know this is hard for you, but the divorce will be final soon, and we need to start preparing for our life together. He said you're getting a nice settlement, enough for a cute little condo somewhere." A cute little condo. This child, who was barely out of college when I was teaching my kids to ride bikes, was dismissing me to a condo while she moved into the house where I'd nursed my dying mother. "Tell the movers to put everything back in the truck," I said. "I can't do that," Robert said. "Robert doesn't own this house. I do. And if those boxes aren't back in that truck in 10 minutes, I'll call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." Her face went pale. She pulled out her phone, presumably to call Robert, but I was already dialing 911. The movers, sensing drama they didn't want to be part of, started slowly carrying boxes back out.
That night, Robert came home in a rage. How dare I embarrass Crystal? How dare I make her cry? How dare I act like I still had any say in what happened in our house? "Your house," I said quietly. "Check the deed, Robert. Check whose name is on it, and then check whose name isn't." The look on his face was the first victory in what would become my war. After the moving truck incident, I knew I needed professional help, but not just any lawyer. I needed someone who understood what it meant to be a woman my age, discarded and disrespected. That's when I remembered Janet Morrison from book club. She'd mentioned once that her daughter, Victoria, was a divorce attorney who specialized in what she called gray divorces, splits after decades of marriage. Victoria Morrison turned out to be a godsend wrapped in a power suit. She was in her 40s, with silver streaks in her hair that she wore like battle stripes. When I walked into her office with my box of documents, she took one look at my face and said, "Let me guess. He thinks you're going to roll over because you're too old to fight?" "Something like that," I admitted. We spent 3 hours going through everything. The house deed in my name only. The investment accounts he'd opened without telling me. The business valuations he'd tried to hide. But the real gold mine was something I'd almost forgotten about entirely. A prenuptial agreement we'd signed 3 months before our wedding. "This is fascinating," Victoria said, adjusting her glasses. "It says here that in the event of infidelity, the cheating spouse forfeits claim to any premarital assets. Your grandmother's house was premarital, wasn't it?" My heart started racing. "Yes, she left it to me 2 years before we married." "And you have proof of his affair?" I showed her the credit card statements, the text messages I'd screenshot, Linda, the hairdresser's written statement. Victoria smiled like a cat who'd found cream. "There's more," she said, flipping through papers. "This clause here, it states that any attempts to hide assets during divorce proceedings results in automatic forfeiture of those assets to the wronged party. Has he been moving money?" I pulled out 6 months of bank statements I'd been quietly collecting. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, deposits into his brother's business, cash withdrawals that matched Crystal's shopping sprees. "Margaret," Victoria said slowly, "he's not just having an affair. He's been systematically planning to leave you with nothing while hiding probably hundreds of thousands of dollars, but he made one crucial error. What's that? He assumed you wouldn't fight back. He assumed wrong. We spent the next 2 hours building our strategy, not just for divorce, but for what Victoria called total financial justice. Every document would be scrutinized, every hidden penny would be found, every lie would be exposed. One more thing, Victoria said as I prepared to leave. That prenup he signed? He probably doesn't even remember it exists. Let's keep it that way until the perfect moment. The first sign that Robert realized he'd underestimated me came during our initial divorce mediation. He walked in with his lawyer, some slick downtown attorney who probably cost more than my car, expecting me to be alone or with some bargain attorney. Instead, there sat Victoria Morrison, whose reputation in family law was legendary. Mrs. Chen has some concerns about asset disclosure, Victoria began smoothly. We'll need complete financial records going back 5 years. Robert's lawyer, a Mr. Davidson, waved his hand dismissively. My client has been entirely forthcoming. Mrs. Chen will receive the standard settlement, half the marital assets minus the house, which my client intends to keep for stability. I'm sorry, Victoria said, her voice sharp as winter ice. Which house would that be? The family home, of course. The house titled solely in my client's name? The house she inherited from her grandmother? That house? I watched Robert's face change colors like a mood ring. He leaned over to whisper urgently to his lawyer, who shuffled through papers with increasing panic. There seems to be some confusion, Davidson stammered. No confusion at all, Victoria smiled. The house belongs to Mrs. Chen. It always has. Now, about those hidden accounts. The meeting devolved from there. Robert kept trying to catch my eye, to use that look that once made me fold like a deck chair. But I stared straight ahead, thinking about my grandmother's china in a dumpster somewhere, about Crystal measuring my windows for new curtains. 2 days later, Robert showed up at the house uninvited. I was in the garden tending to my roses when I heard his car door slam. Margaret, we need to talk without the lawyers, he said, using his reasonable voice. This is getting out of hand.
What's out of hand is you showing up at my house without permission, I replied, not looking up from my pruning. Your house? Come on, Maggie. We lived here together for over 20 years. Yes, and for all those years you forgot to notice whose name was on the deed. He tried a different approach. What about the kids? What about the grandchildren? Do you want them to see us fighting like this? I finally looked at him. Really looked at him. The man I'd once loved looked smaller somehow, like a suit that had been washed in hot water. The children already know about Crystal. Anna saw you at the mall with her last month. Michael's wife recognized you at that hotel in Miami. So please, Robert, don't pretend this is about them. His face crumbled then, realizing his own children knew about his betrayal. But instead of shame, he chose anger. Victoria was a maestro conducting a symphony of legal destruction. Every motion she filed was precise, devastating, and perfectly timed. First came the forensic accountant she hired to trace Robert's hidden money. Within 2 weeks, we'd uncovered 3 separate accounts he'd opened under his brother's business, totaling $267,000. How did you know to look? I asked Victoria during one of our strategy meetings. Cheating husbands are predictable, she said. They always think they're being clever, but they follow patterns. Your Robert is textbook, moving money to family members, claiming business expenses for personal purchases, using cash for everything.
The next blow came when we subpoenaed Crystal's employment records. Turns out, she'd received several suspicious bonuses that coincided exactly with large withdrawals from our joint accounts. Robert had essentially been paying his girlfriend with our marital funds. But the masterstroke was when Victoria filed for an emergency injunction preventing Robert from accessing the house. Since it was my sole property and he'd attempted to move another person in without permission, the judge granted it immediately. Robert had 48 hours to remove his belongings under police supervision. I'll never forget the day the police arrived to enforce the order. I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, watching Robert frantically pack his things into boxes. Crystal was there too, mascara running down her face, begging the officers for more time. "Ma'am, you were never authorized to be on this property," one officer told her firmly. "Any items you brought here need to leave with you today." She tried to take my mother's antique mirror, claiming Robert had given it to her. I simply showed the officer the insurance documentation with my name on it. Crystal's face turned an interesting shade of purple as she was forced to leave it behind. Robert's brother showed up with a truck, glaring at me as they loaded boxes. "You're a vindictive witch," he spat. "No," I replied calmly. "I'm a woman who knows her worth. There's a difference." The prenuptial agreement bomb dropped during the final settlement hearing. Davidson, Robert's attorney, was mid-speech about equitable distribution when Victoria smoothly interrupted. "Your Honor, we'd like to introduce a prenuptial agreement that specifically addresses infidelity and premarital assets." The look on Robert's face was priceless. He'd genuinely forgotten it existed. Signed 28 years ago, probably thinking it would never matter. Davidson requested a recess to review the document. When they returned, all the fight had gone out of them. The agreement was ironclad. Crystal's name appeared nowhere, of course, but the evidence of the affair was overwhelming. The house of cards Robert built with Crystal began collapsing faster than a sandcastle at high tide. It started when his firm got wind of the financial improprieties uncovered during our divorce. Using company funds to pay your mistress's bonuses is generally frowned upon in the accounting world. He was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. My daughter Anna told me Crystal started showing up at family events, trying to ingratiate herself with Robert's children. It went about as well as you'd expect. At Michael's birthday dinner, she had the audacity to sit in my usual seat and suggest they call her Mom. Sarah, my youngest and fiercest, looked her dead in the eye and said, "I'd rather call you what you are, but there are children present." Without access to the house or his hidden funds, now frozen by court order, Robert and Crystal were forced to move into her studio apartment. A studio apartment. After living in a 4-bedroom house, they were now tripping over each other in 600 square feet. Victoria heard through the legal grapevine that they were fighting constantly. The financial pressure mounted quickly. Crystal, it turned out, had expensive tastes funded entirely by Robert's generous gifts. Without his money flowing, she was struggling to maintain her lifestyle. Her BMW was repossessed, her credit cards maxed out, the designer wardrobe she'd been accumulating, sold on consignment to make rent. Then came the investigation results from Robert's firm. He was terminated for embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty. 28 years with the company, gone. His pension revoked. His reputation in the industry destroyed. At 56, he was unemployable in his field and facing potential criminal charges. I received a text from him one night. "I hope you're happy. You've ruined my life." I didn't respond, but I did pour myself a nice glass of wine and sit on my porch, in peace. Crystal lasted exactly 3 more weeks. My hairdresser, Linda, God bless the Beauty Shop Information Network, told me Crystal had been seen moving her things out while Robert was at a job interview. She left him a note, on pink stationery, ironically, saying she needed to focus on her own journey and couldn't be with someone who had so much baggage. Robert tried calling me repeatedly after that. I didn't answer. He left voicemails that went from angry to pleading to pathetic. In one, he actually said, "I made a mistake. Can we talk about reconciliation?" Reconciliation. After he'd thrown away 28 years, humiliated me publicly, tried to steal my home, and told me I was too old and boring, the audacity of men never ceases to amaze me. The final divorce decree was a thing of beauty. Victoria had crafted it like a master sculptor, chiseling away at Robert's expectations until only the truth remained. I kept the house, of course. The prenuptial agreement made that non-negotiable. But I also received 70% of our remaining marital assets due to Robert's financial misconduct and attempts to hide money. The hidden accounts he'd squirreled away, all mine by judge's order. The pension he'd lost due to embezzlement. The value was calculated into his share and transferred to me from other assets. His precious BMW, the one he'd bought himself for his midlife crisis, sold to pay my legal fees. The best part was the alimony ruling. Despite Robert's job loss being self-inflicted, he was still obligated to pay support based on his earning potential. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd seen every trick in the book, was unsympathetic to his pleas of poverty. "Mr. Chen," she said sternly, "you made calculated choices to destroy your marriage and your career. The consequences of those choices don't absolve you of your responsibilities to the woman who supported you for nearly 3 decades." I walked out of that courtroom with my head high and my future secure. Robert shuffled out like a defeated general, his brother supporting him by the elbow. He looked every one of his 56 years and then some. The house felt different after that. Lighter somehow. I hired a crew to repaint every room, choosing colors my grandmother would have loved. I found some of her china at an estate sale, not the same pattern, but close enough to make me smile. The kitchen got new appliances paid for with Robert's hidden vacation fund. I turned his home office into a craft room where I now make quilts for my grandchildren. Each stitch is a small act of reclamation, turning something that was his into something that brings joy. My children rallied around me in ways that healed my heart. Anna brought me fresh flowers every week. Michael fixed everything Robert had let deteriorate. Loose doorknobs, creaky hinges, all the small neglects that add up over time. Sarah helped me set up online dating profiles, though I wasn't ready for that yet. "You're only 55, Mom," she said. "That's young. You've got decades of adventure ahead." Maybe she was right. But first, I needed to remember who Margaret Chen was before she became Mrs. Robert Chen. I enrolled in a watercolor class. I joined a hiking group for seniors. I volunteered at the library, helping other women navigate computer basics and job applications. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Robert at the grocery store. I was selecting avocados when I felt someone staring. There he was by the discount bread, looking like a completely different person. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair too long, and he'd lost that confident swagger that once charmed me. "Margaret," he said, approaching cautiously, "you look well." I did look well. I joined a water aerobics class, started eating better without the stress, and the freedom showed in my posture. "Thank you," I said simply, continuing to shop. He followed me like a lost puppy. "I'm working at H&R Block now, seasonal work. It's humble. From senior partner to seasonal tax preparer." I didn't comment. just added tomatoes to my cart. Crystal's engaged, he blurted out, to some pharmaceutical representative. They're moving to Dallas. That's nice, I said, meaning it. Let her be someone else's problem. I'm living with my brother, he continued, just until I get back on my feet. The criminal charges were dropped, but the civil suit from the firm, it's complicated. I finally stopped and looked at him directly. Robert, what do you want? His shoulders sagged. I guess. I wanted to apologize. I destroyed everything for nothing. You were a good wife, Margaret. The best. I was an idiot. Yes, I agreed. You were. We stood there in awkward silence until he shuffled away. I finished my shopping in peace, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a twinge of something. Not love, not even pity exactly, but maybe the ghost of compassion for the man he used to be. Linda, from the beauty shop, kept me updated on the gossip. Crystal's engagement ended when her fiancé discovered her history with married men. Robert wasn't her first, apparently. She moved back to Ohio to live with her parents. Robert's brother kicked him out after 3 months, tired of supporting a grown man. Last anyone heard, he was renting a room from an old college friend and working 2 jobs to pay off his legal debts. My children struggled with their feelings about their father. Anna refused to let him see her children unsupervised. Michael invited him to dinner once a month out of duty. Sarah cut him off completely after he missed her graduation because he was too embarrassed to show his face at a family event. I don't miss him, Sarah told me over coffee one afternoon. I miss who I thought he was. Does that make sense? It made perfect sense. I miss that fiction too sometimes. Usually late at night when the house felt too quiet. A year after everything ended, I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I started a support group for women over 50 going through divorce. We met in my living room, the same room Robert had tried to give to Crystal, every Thursday evening. Coffee, cookies, and brutal honesty about starting over when the world tells you you're too old to begin again. The first meeting was just me and 2 women from church. Within 6 months, we had 20 regulars and a waiting list. Women drove from 3 counties away to sit in my grandmother's house and learn that they weren't crazy, weren't worthless, and definitely weren't too old to fight for what was theirs. I shared everything. The legal strategies, the financial tricks to watch for, the emotional manipulation tactics. Victoria Morrison came as a guest speaker, offering pro bono consultations. My accountant taught a workshop on finding hidden assets. Even Linda from the beauty shop gave a talk on self-care during crisis, because sometimes a good haircut is armor. One woman, Barbara, was 62 when her husband left her for his CrossFit instructor. She'd been ready to accept his offer of $500 a month in alimony and no share of his business. After joining our group, she hired Victoria and walked away with half of a $2 million company and the house. You saved my life, Barbara told me later. Not just financially. You showed me I was allowed to be angry. I was allowed to fight back. That's what we did in that living room. We gave each other permission to be furious, to be strategic, to be difficult. We normalized the rage that comes when someone you trusted treats you like expired milk. I started speaking at women's centers, senior communities, anywhere they'd have me. My talk was always the same. Your age is not an expiration date. Your kindness is not weakness, and your silence is not required. The house, my grandmother's house, became a symbol of resistance. Women would drive by just to see it, to know that someone had won, that it was possible to keep what was yours. I planted a garden in the front yard with a little sign, Margaret's Place, where women bloom after winter. Robert tried to contact me one last time, 2 years after the divorce. He sent a letter saying he was in therapy, working on himself, understanding his mistakes. He wished me well and said I deserved everything I'd gained. I kept the letter, not out of sentiment, but as proof that even the most stubborn men eventually see the truth. My name is Margaret Chen. I'm 55 years old. I'm a mother, a grandmother, a survivor, and a warrior. They thought I'd disappear into the background of my own life story. Instead, I wrote a new ending, one where the grandmother wins.